How's it going, everybody? RazingHel here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the iOS version of Realpolitiks. So as you can see here, I'm logged in with my iOS gaming account, and the game it's not entirely optimized for iOS devices. So if you'll notice in the right-hand corner, there is the menu. It's obviously not the most touch-friendly kind of menu, but it gets the job done. Also, it should be noted that this game, in case you're not aware of what Realpolitiks is, it's like sort of a grand strategy game that's set in the contemporary era. So in other words, you're going to be playing from pretty much the present into the future. You can select pretty much any country that exists in the world at the moment and try to lead them to greatness, right? And as a typical grand strategy sort of game, you're going to be in control of the economy of each of these powers. So let's just continue here. And now one of the things that also should be noted about this version of the game is that it has some pretty high requirements. So you're not going to be able to play this on older devices. Basically, they say you won't be able to play it on anything with less than 1 GB of RAM. So they mention the iPhone S, the iPhone, no, let me think here. The iPhone 6, the iPhone 6S, the iPad Mini 3, and older, the iPad Air and older. So you're going to be pretty much limited to the iPad 2. You're going to be pretty much limited to the iPad Air 2 and later. So in other words, iPad Air 2, iPad 2017, iPad Pro, iPad, the latest refresh of the Pro. I'm sorry, I forget what it is. It's some of these models have really bad marketing, I think, on Apple's part. But anyway, here we are actually in game. And as you can see, you can scroll around quite nicely. Really no problem with that. You can pinch to zoom. So there you go. This is as zoomed out as you get. So as you might imagine, the world is fairly large and you're going to have to do a little bit of zooming to get around it. You have your various filters. At the moment, my tutorial is still on because basically I need help learning these mechanics yet, as I never actually played this game on PC. And it has... there are some niggling little aspects to it that I'm going to go over and point, because these could be deal breakers for you. I don't think they're necessarily that big of an issue, because overall the game runs fairly smoothly. I haven't had any performance issues. They're just some UI optimizations that I would personally like to see. So for example, here on the left-hand side of the screen, we have these buttons that correspond with the government, the economy, warfare, and other countries. It's like diplomacy. You'll notice every time I touch one of these buttons, it brings a tooltip up for it. So think about this. If you were going to be playing this game regularly, you would think that I would understand what the military button here is for, or what the economy button here is for, without having to have that little tooltip pop up each and every single time. And that's the thing, like, if we go ahead and we take a look at the options, they're fairly limited. You can turn off hints, you can turn on plain view, which reduces some of the complexity of the map. But aside from that, you really don't have anything to tweak. So it'd be nice to see something like maybe turn off tooltips at the very least. And then also you'll notice, like, the menus themselves, the buttons, they're not conventional mobile. So like over here we have another selection of a lot of intricate little menus that are all tucked away in here. And like, let's say I wanted to close this menu. Normally a lot of iOS mobile applications are going to have a little red X in the upper right corner of the panel. You can't see I'm tapping on it right now, but to close this panel, it would make sense I could just tap a little red X. You can't do that. You actually have to close it by double tapping the button once again. So it's a toggle button. And that's basically the reason why, I don't know, it just doesn't feel that optimized for mobile, in my opinion. Does it get the job done? Yes. Could it be so much better? I think it really could. And because it's like, anytime I tap any of these icons, you're going to be seeing the tool tips pop up for each and every one of them every single time. And it would be much better if you could just turn it off. Because in the beginning of the game, sure, that is very helpful to have those little tooltips pop up. But like what I would do as an alternative is hold down perhaps, or just double taps. In other words, like here we open up our government menu, and then I go over here to the population tab, And if I wanted to bring up more information about this, it would be pretty nice. Just tap it again, and it could bring up another overlay screen that I could later click off that would give me so much more information than a tooltip would be able to provide, while at the same time letting the player know what this button does, that it's population. Also, it should be considered that like whenever I click on any of these, like it says it right at the very top of the box itself. So in other words, like right below it says internal politics, it says country right now, which is what the tooltip says. It says politics right now, which is what the tooltip says. It says population right now, which is what the tooltip says. And maybe you're noticing a pattern here. The tooltips oftentimes are somewhat redundant, as the information is already displayed to the person right in the menu that you open up. So really what would be helpful is just if you could open up a panel that would reveal more information, like take a look at the hints here. If the hints was you're simply able to open them up by tapping that same button again, because at the moment it does not really toggle. If I tap this button, you can't really see me tapping it because I don't have a camera on it. But if I tap the population button twice, and nothing really happens besides toggling that tooltip on and off. So this would be a perfect opportunity to allow the player to open up a much more complex screen displaying the information that really relates to the smaller workings of how population works, because you'll notice there are a lot of fairly complex changes that it makes to your economy. I'm tapping on some of them, and it would be important to sort of get the real inside information on that to be able to make those smarter decisions. And that's why I really don't think I really think it could have been so much better on iPad. And it should be noted I am using it on an iPad, the 2017 version. So this one it performs fairly well. Like you can see, scrolling around, there really isn't any latency. There's not really any lag to it. That's all the way zoomed out. We can also zoom in quite a bit as well. And you'll notice, look at that. It's smooth. So if you have the hardware that you need, it's more than capable of performing. It's just those UI issues, the lack of true optimization for mobile games. And as somebody who has played a fair few mobile games, I think I have a basic understanding of what functionality on mobile looks like versus what it looks like on the desktop, where you have a very pointer-based user interface. And then, so like a lot of these other menus that you bring up, you'll notice there's no little red X to click it off, right? So if you think about it in terms of like Windows, the Windows operating system, you have a certain convention. A user can always expect that to close a window, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be clicking the right corner of the screen where there's a little red X. If they want to minimize the window, they click the right corner where there's a little dash bar, right? So when you change things like this on mobile, people are expecting a certain thing. They're expecting the UI to function in a certain way, much like you would on Windows. So when you start throwing things at them, like for example, here we have the stat, and they don't have a little red icon, it can throw people for a bit of a loop. Obviously, you can click close on the bottom, and it works. But it's just that little bit of that's a bit of an extra hurdle for people who are, let's say, new to grand strategy and thinking, hey, here, I'm sick of the really casual games that are currently available on the App Store. The vast majority of apps on Android, Google Play, and the iOS App Store, they're all very basic kind of gameplay experiences. They're very canned and stuff. So if we're interested in something a little bit more complex, they would be interested perhaps in looking at games like this. But you want to make that barrier for entry into it as seamless as possible, where they're not going to feel this disconnect between versions of the game. Where I'm very familiar, for example, with the iOS platform. I want to play games on iOS, but all of a sudden I'm seeing a Windows-style user interface being presented to me, and I just think that adds that extra hurdle to entry, an extra barrier to entry that is simply unneeded. And I can understand, optimization for this kind of stuff takes time and it takes money, and you want to get the product out the door, because at the end of the day, if you can't ship product, it doesn't matter a whole lot. But these are just some thoughts that I'm having in terms of its usability. When it comes to accessing countries themselves, there is a pretty smart system in place. You double tap a country, and the diplomacy menus and what else will show up. In other words, you can say like here, we double tap this country. We have diplomacy actions that we can perform, and then we have spy actions that we can perform, and that works very smoothly. That is a very good example, I think, of how to properly optimize for a mobile screen. That's really how I would do it. Another thing that I'm not too certain about is how this would work on a smaller device. So they talk about it not supporting the iPhone 6s. What about the iPhone 7? It's really not mentioned per se, but suppose you did want to play this on the smaller version of the iPhone 7. I think the screen itself would just be too cramped to do that in practicality, and that might even be the case for the iPad mini. I don't have the iPad mini here anymore. I used to have it, and I probably could have tested it out if I still had the iPad mini, but I got rid of it. And that was the iPad mini 4, and that's currently the only version that this game currently can run on. But I'm just wondering about the screen size. Like, this seems to be the smallest I would want to play this game on a screen size. It doesn't seem like if you went with a smaller screen size that it could handle it, and that you'd be able to easily decipher, or not necessarily easily, but be fairly reasonably sure that you could decipher the actual text on a lot of these buttons. So it's like, this is more based, this is not necessarily a kind of review that's based around the game itself. Realpolitiks is a grand strategy game that's been out for about 4 months, 5 months on PC. So if you are interested in a review on how the game itself works, I think there are many better places to look for that, because I haven't played it very much. I've played it for about 5 hours, and as anybody knows with grand strategy games, that is a very poor amount of time overall. Like, there is so much depth to these grand strategy games that you have to put in at least like 20 hours to have a fairly full understanding of how the game is going to work. So I'm not doing that. I'm looking at how good is the mobile port, and by and large, for a grand strategy game on mobile, I think it is very solid. Obviously, there are some problems here, but there just aren't many grand strategy games, if any others, on mobile at the moment. So if you're really interested, if you really like the mobile platform and you're interested in taking a step forward, if you're interested in this idea of having a little bit more of a complex game on the device instead of a lot of these Clash of Clans kind of games. Clash of Clans is always a tongue twister to me, by the way. I would definitely look at it. It's currently at a very reasonable price. I think it was $6 on the App Store, which, of course, as most apps on the App Store versus their PC component versions are, it's a bit of a price break, right? Because if you think about it, it's the full game, right? There was nothing missing from it. This is everything that was proposed in the original, in the Steam version of the game. So you're not missing out on anything besides perhaps some of the functionality that comes with a pointing device. But it's the full game, and it's available for around $6 on the iOS App Store, which I think is a very good deal overall. There are some, I said it before, there are some problems that I have with the user interface, and I think it could have been optimized better. But by and large, I think it's the right step forward to getting an entirely new audience, hopefully interested in this type of game. And if I were you, I'd take a look at it to see if it's something that might be up your alley that you might be interested in. If you use an iPad, I don't think it is available on the Google Play Store. I haven't even checked, to be honest. And once again, this is the point that I try to drive home to people. It's really not about being an Apple fanboy or anything like that, but it's simply the iOS platform. It is a lot more stable for game developers, and therefore you're going to be seeing a lot more games being released there first before they get released to Google Play. One of the reasons that might not happen is you have really cheap, crappy games, and they get released to the Google Play Store because Google Play sort of has less stringent requirements for getting your applications on there. But that's not necessarily a good sign. That's a sign of bad quality, more or less. But yeah, this is a good example of why you want to use the iOS platform if you're interested in gaming on mobile devices over the Android platform. And that might be a bit of an unpopular opinion, but I'm saying it's pretty much unprecedented that Android gets these games before iOS does. So if you're serious about gaming on mobile, this is the selling point for iOS. It has nothing to do with Apple or Android. It has to do with where the games work first, right? So anyway, thank you very much for watching. This has been my first impressions of the iOS port of Realpolitiks by Jujubee, and I hope to see you next time.